All right, so we're doing more graphing of equations and inequalities. Last day for this target. A couple things here. So we're actually going to be graphing based off of either an equation, an inequality, or information given in a word problem. So learning goals: I can correctly graph, label axes, scale, and include points when given a function rule. So these are all things that you have to do. And then correctly graph, label axes, scale, and shade a situation representing an inequality when given a real-world scenario. So things to know, things to remember. Going to use the equation of line again. So this is just a refresher. This is the format we're going to use. Even with the inequality, the only thing that's going to change is instead of this symbol, we would have like a, less than or greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. Okay. B, again, is your y-intercept, which is where the line crosses or intersects the y-axis. And once you have this point, you will use your slope to find the second point, which is going to give you your line. All right, so let's start off with our first example. The function rule W equals 15g plus 200 represents the total weight W in pounds of a pool that contains g gallons of a certain liquid. What is a reasonable graph of the function rule given that the capacity of the pool is 80 gallons? And we need to graph the situation. We need to correctly label the axes. We need to scale correctly and include at least 2 points. All right, so let's start off by looking at our equation that they give us. We've got W equals 15g plus 200. Now, first thing you want to do is kind of set up all the grid lines of the axes. So we're going to look at this number here, this plus 200, which is our starting point. That's where we start on the y-axis. Okay, and we're going to label the first grid line at that point. That's usually the way that's easiest to do it. That's, usually you can use that as your scale as well. Sometimes it doesn't make as much sense to do that, but in this case it does. And this is also going to be the first point on your y-axis. So we'll start off, we're going to call this axis W, because remember this represents, there it is. So W is the same thing as Y, and G is the same thing as X. So the y-axis is W. We're going to label that one 200. Since that first grid line is at 200, we can go 400, 600, and you can keep going all the way up to 800 if you want. I just stopped at 1600. And 80, now we're going to move on to the x-axis. 80 is basically, that's the maximum number. That's what we're looking at for our x-axis. So we want, as far to the right as possible to be as close to 80 as possible. And the easiest way to do this is to divide by the number of grid lines that you have. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we can divide 80 by 10 and get 8, which, when you think about it, isn't exactly the best number to use for each of these grid lines. It's not as clean as like 200 was. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of adjust it a little bit, and we're going to round up to 10. So each of these grid lines will be 10. And we can take that all the way up to 90. And it's actually not a bad idea to go past what your max is on there, so it's not all the way to the edge. It just looks a little better. And then again, X is our x-axis, we're going to call G. So we label that G. So that's important. We want to make sure that we label these not as X and Y, but as W and G, in addition to making all this. But we're not done yet. We also need to label the axes. So these numbers down here represent gallons, all of these, which we can find from here. So it's 80 gallons. And then this is the weight, because we talked about W being the weight in pounds. We also saw that it was G gallons. So that'll help you determine how to label this. And then finally, we need to actually go ahead and put our graph on here. So remember, I said our first point was going to be at 0, which is right here, 0, 200. So that's our first point. And then the easiest thing to do is to just pick a number. I usually like to just go with the max. So that's what I did. And I plugged in the way that I got that number, so that you know. So if 80 is our x value, or in this case G, I just took 15 times 80 plus 200. 15 times 80 was 1200 plus 200. which gave me a y value of 1400. So that's how I knew to put the point there. Now that I have 2 points, which I'm going to label, I can draw in that line there. And I'm done. I've done everything it's asked me to do. There's my graph. Don't continue past there because this is the max that the pool can hold, so we're just going to stop our line right there. Don't continue along with the arrow. All right, so now inequalities versus equations. So when we write an inequality based on a graph, we do the same procedure as before. We do 2 additional steps. So to determine the inequality symbol you do, look at the line. If it's solid, or in this case, we're going to look at the symbol. Before we looked at the line, now we're going to look at the symbol. So if it has this or this, our line is solid. If it has this or this, our line is dashed. Okay? And then for shading, if the shading is above the line, okay, we always want to see if it's above or below the line first. And that's going to be any line that has a slope. The only time we worry about left or right is if the line is straight up and down like that. Dashed or solid doesn't matter. But anyway, so if it's opening towards the variable like this, okay, or in this case, we'd more than likely be y, or whatever our y value is going to be. So if it's this or this, we shade above the line. If it opens away from the variable, meaning it's less than, the variable is less than whatever's on the other side, then we shade below the line. Okay? So let's look at this. We have a bookstore that charges $8 per polo shirt and $10 per spirit wear shirt. X is going to be the number of polo shirts, and Y is the number of spirit wear shirts. And they typically sell at least, so that's important to know, because that's going to help you with that inequality symbol, at least $150 a week. And we need to graph it and correctly label and do everything appropriately. So this is the equation that we come up with. Okay, so we have 8x because it was $8 per polo shirt, and X is the number of polo shirts. And there we go, an underline. And then we have $10 per spirit wear shirt, and Y was the number of spirit wear shirts. So we have that's how we get the 8x plus 10y, and then we sell at least $150 a week. So the 150 goes on the other side, okay? And then as far as the symbols go, we know that this is the low end because it says at least 150 a week, which means that this stuff on the left-hand side of our inequality is going to be 150 or more. So it opens towards that. And because it says at least, we include this underneath. All right, if it said more than 150, then we wouldn't have this line underneath. But anyway, what we want to do is we're going to take that, and a little bit differently than the other one, the easiest way to do these problems is we want to find the x-intercept. So we're going to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept. So to find the x-intercept, we're going to plug in 0 for y, and then we're going to solve for x. So 8x plus 10 times 0 greater than or equal to 150, which is really just 8x is greater than or equal to 150, and then we would divide by 8 so that we could get x by itself. And then 150 divided by 8 is 18.75. Then we're going to do the same thing again, except now we're going to plug in 0 for x to solve for the y-intercept. And we'll get to the graph and we'll show you how this all comes into play. So go through the same things. We plug in 0 for x, which gives us 10y over on this side. Divide both sides by 10. 150 divided by 10 is 15. So we have x is greater than or equal to 18.75, and y is greater than or equal to 15. So as far as the graph goes, we are going to have our y and our x. We're going to start off with our y. And we're just going to go up by 2 here because the numbers are fairly small, so that makes it easiest. Notice I'm skipping lines, so this first line, even though it's not shown, is 1. All right, but we're only going to show every 2, so this side isn't cluttered with numbers. And then for our x, we're going to do the same thing. Go up by 2, every other grid line. And that's for the x is the number of polo shirts, y is the number of spirit wear shirts. And the reason why we want to make sure that we, when you're scaling this, keep in mind, for our x-axis, we have to go beyond whatever this is. So we have to go past 18. Or we have to go at least to 18.75. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily make sense. So we're like, okay, so we can want to make sure we have enough room to go to 20 at least, which we do. And then for y, we wanted to have enough room to go to at least to like 15, which we do, because 15 would be right there. You don't need to label it, but that's where 15 is. So we have enough room on our graph for everything, keeping the same scaling, and that's important too. These are all going up by 2. These are all going up by 2. So we know that we have our y, which is greater than or equal to 15. So on the y-axis, put a point at 15. And for x, we have 18.75, so a little bit before the 19. And then we look at our symbol, and in this case, we have the greater than or equal to, so that means that's a solid line. And because it's opening towards the variable in both cases, we're going to shade above that line. And that's all you have to do. That is your finished product. So we've got the shading, we've got the right line, we've got our points, we have the axes labeled, and the scaling correct. And that's it. So this probably one of the harder parts of this unit, but we've got an entire week to spend on this about practicing and whatnot. So if you have any questions at all, as always, let me know.